Greetings, YouTube. I do not believe that any nation should produce, possess, or use nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons. We don't have a use for them. They serve no purpose. Yes, I know you can say they're deterrents. For something to be deterrent, people have to actually believe that you will use them. And the concept of using any of these weapons is horrifying. The consequences would be worse. You cannot imagine what the world would be like if the nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons we currently have were let loose. I grew up as a child of the Cold War. I grew up believing in my heart of hearts, in the very marrow of my bones, that the world was going to end in a rain of nuclear fire. That there literally was no reason for me to continue. My grandmother desperately wanted me to graduate high school. I've never been able to figure out why. Maybe she thought I was a bad student. She didn't live to see me graduate, unfortunately. Because I loved her, I did it. I had planned on killing myself on graduation night. Because I saw no point. Why bother going out and getting a job and an apartment and trying to live a life that I knew was going to end at any second when some shriveled up old man would push a button and kill us all? But I fell in love with someone, and I got so wrapped up in the relationship that I didn't die. And by the time the relationship was over, I'd had other reasons not to die. And eventually I realized that dying really wasn't a great option. But I never lost my hatred of the people that put me into that place, who convinced me so thoroughly that the world was going to end. And then as time passed, I began to realize just how horrible these weapons were, not just the nuclear bombs, but the biological and the chemical weapons that we possessed and other nations possessed. I mean, the Soviets created enough weaponized smallpox and anthrax to kill every single human being on the planet 100 times. I've never quite fathomed why you need that much of a disease for anything. I mean, you can't use it for war. If you let it go, we all die. Or enough of us die, the species itself would probably collapse. So I never understood why you possessed it, why you created it. And now, of course, we're stuck with the fact that they can't properly store it. But on the other hand, I've never understood how one nation, particularly a nation that already has these weapons, thinks it has the right to tell another nation not to make them. I am, of course, speaking about Iran and North Korea, because just this past weekend, North Korea tested a nuclear device, their second. Though people question whether the first one was a nuclear device or just a large conventional explosion. But this time around, no one really questions the fact that it was, in fact, a nuclear device. Now, I don't want North Korea to have a nuclear device, nor do I want Iran to have a nuclear device. But why does the international community seem to think it has an opinion about whether they create them? Last I checked, the United States didn't ask the international community if it was okay for them to create a nuclear device. Nor did China, or Russia, or Britain, or any other country that's got nuclear weapons. A sovereign nation is just that, an individual, separate nation that has the right to do what it wants to within its borders. Now, I don't agree with what they do. In fact, I disagree with almost every policy almost every government on the planet makes. Because very rarely are these policies for the benefit of humanity or the citizens that live within that nation. But how does the international community think it's going to convince these two nations not to create these weapons? Sure, they can use boycotts, but boycotts don't always work. Now, if the community decides, okay, these nations are a danger, they get together, they form a quorum, and they vote that, we have to invade and stop them from doing this. As an international community, I can't argue with that. It's very similar to issuing a warrant from a government that a person needs to be arrested, just on a much larger scale. But it's also important never to forget that essentially the UN and the international community in general, for those that aren't members of the UN, are pretty much forming a posse. There's no real external authority. They're not appealing to some higher power. There's a bunch of people who've come together and decide, okay, Harry over there is causing us problems. So we're all going to band together. We're going to go beat up Harry and throw him in a cell. There is no other higher purpose here. It's just a posse. It's always disturbed me that people seem so comfortable with the fact that the posse is a model that we should be using, because vigilante justice, and that's what it would be, isn't healthy. Of course, I've been an advocate of creating a world government for years, actually creating a functioning, structured government that would control every nation just as though it was a part of a greater country. And of course, when you mention this, the nut jobs come out of the woodwork and start chanting one world government. But I've never seen a problem with the idea of having someone in charge, because let's face it, most nations don't have long-term plans, and their short-term plans aren't good for usually for the nation that they are, or for the community in general of the entire planet. So maybe having some external planning involved, with some people thinking about things long-term, might be a good idea. I don't want anybody to have nuclear bombs. I don't want another generation of children growing up thinking the world is going to end in nuclear fire, or that their family is going to die around them from a plague that was released by somebody as having been turned into a weapon. And I don't want them worrying that chemicals will filter down out of the rain and kill all their crops, or cripple their children, or turn the next generation into a bunch of deformed babies. But I also can't figure out how one nation can tell another nation, we've got these things, but we don't want you to have them.